So this is a first strike weapon. And it's, by the way, if you've seen the movie Hunt for Red October, that submarine that they used in that movie was the sub that Joe McMonigal outed.
Non-speaking autistic children, some of them have amazing psychic abilities that are repeatable and testable to high 90s, sometimes even 100% accuracies.
I was enrolled at Gate, right? Like I was in the Gate classroom. I drank the pink drink. It's just that there was a progression of more. From the outside, serving neurodivergent and behavioral health kids, but on the inside was supporting a mission for defense contractor research for psychic potential development.
ESP is more top secret than UFOs. Why? Because whether or not you believe in UFOs is of no threat to the governments and power structures of this world. But ESP, telepathy, remote viewing, psionics, whatever you want to call it, is a threat. Why? Because they know it's real. They use it, they've weaponized it, and they don't care who they hurt to keep it a secret. The last thing that they want is you believing that telepathy is real. Lots of people learning it, and worse yet, using it on them to uncover their illegal actions and dark secrets. Today, we are diving deep. We start with a bang, and we end with an enigma. You're not going to want to miss this one. It is a wild ride. I'm Disclosure Dad. Let's disclose some truth. In 1995, the CIA's psychic spying program called Stargate was about to be outed in a book called Psychic Warrior from one of their former participants and spies, Dr. David Morehouse. And the CIA was concerned about this. So what they tried to do was see if they could get ahead of this leak and say, oh yeah, well, it's true we had a psychic spying program for over 20 years. We spent millions and millions of dollars on it, but it just didn't work very well. The truth is, it worked remarkably well. And to give you an example of how well it actually did work, we're going to take a look at the case of Joe McMonigal, who was actually the first remote viewer in the program on an operational case during the Cold War. In this example, it's the 1970s. And the CIA had just discovered the largest building in the world above the Arctic Circle in Russia, surrounded by layers of barbed wire, guards, guns, dogs, and more. They had no clue what was inside this building. It was about 4 blocks away from the closest harbor. Made no sense to them. They could not get anywhere near it. So in desperation, they turned to the Stargate remote viewing program to see if they could get some intel. Let's listen to Joe McMonigal and his friend Shawn describe what Joe found inside this building.
Harley Trent and I worked at Target, and we both pretty much said the same thing, really, that it was a very, very large submarine, huge submarine. I remember somebody asked me in one of my sessions, how big is it? You keep saying big, huge. Well, how big is it? I said, well, it's about 33 feet or 30 feet shy of the length of a Soviet aircraft carrier, and probably 70 feet wide. Really huge. I said it's like 2 big half submarines being stuck together this way. All the Soviet submarines that carried ICBMs carried them straight up and down. So they had to stop to launch. That was like an 18-minute window where they were really vulnerable.
And he said, it's not a cylinder. It's a cylinder that looks like it's cut in half, spread out, and then a flat part welded on the top and the bottom. And the U.S. engineers looked at that later after he sent it, and he said, that's impossible. It'd be crushed at depth. You know, it's highly unlikely, et cetera. But then he added the specifications. It's got a special drive propulsion system that I don't want to say too much about, but it's also got canted launch tubes, which means it can fire nuclear missiles on the run without having to stop, which could give us about 20 minutes warning that we're going to lose 1,200 cities. So this is a first strike weapon. And it's, by the way, if you've seen the movie Hunt for Red October, that submarine that they used in that movie was the sub that Joe McMonigal outed.
We sent the report to the National Security Council. It's carried in by an admiral by the name of Jake Stewart. And he carried the report to the National Security Council, but then he brought it right back. And he said they won't accept it. They said this is just total fantasy. And I asked him why did they say it was fantasy? And he said because they're already centered on something like a troop carrier or something being manufactured there, and that it's not possible because it's not connected to the harbor in any way. I said, well, tell them the Fantasy's going to be launched in 112 days. It actually made me angry that they just resented the information. 114 days later, when they took pictures of the harbor, a channel was cut to the sea. The Typhoon-class submarine TK-089, first ever built prototype, was parked in the harbor, tied up to a Soviet aircraft carrier. And it was about 30 to 33 feet shy of the length of a Soviet aircraft carrier. It was a monster.
Based on this one example, and there are many, many examples that are just as impressive as this one, if not more so. It's clear that the CIA's remote viewing program was an unqualified success. So why did the CIA deny that it was particularly effective? Well, it's clear they wanted to keep their pet project a secret. Remote viewing is a type of telepathy, very structured, very scientific, developed at Stanford Research Institute in Northern California on behest of the CIA. And in remote viewing, a person selects a target. They take that target, which could be a photo or photos, and it may be a description, and puts it into an envelope, seals that envelope, and puts a randomly generated number on that envelope and nothing else. That is then given to a second person called the controller, who knows nothing about the target. Their job is simply to facilitate the third person, who is the remote viewer. The remote viewer then is given simply those randomly generated numbers and nothing else. Their job is to use their psychic abilities to bring back any information they can on the target. Once they are done, that information is then given to a review board, who then judges the success or failure of the remote viewing based on what the target was. To be operational and to be used on real missions, a remote viewer had to be 65% accurate or more consistently. Joe McMonigal, remote viewer number one, was typically in the high 80s to 90% accurate repeatedly. If you'd like more information about Joe McMonigal's remote viewing, check the link below. But the CIA and the government do not own ESP. And to help prove that, in early 2025, the Telepathy Tapes podcast by Kai Dickens hit number one in the United States and Great Britain. It's a podcast that shows non-speaking autistic children. Some of them have amazing psychic abilities that are repeatable and testable to high 90s, sometimes even 100% accuracies. I highly recommend the podcast. It's in the link below. But for today, I'm going to, as quickly as I can, summarize season one. It starts with children who have remarkable psychic abilities, not occasionally, but consistently. It begins with evidence, random number generator, pulling a 3, 4, 5-digit number that the kid cannot possibly see in another room, and the child gets it right over and over again. Then they move on to colors, words, objects, pictures. Pretty much anything they could think to throw at these kids, they're able to communicate telepathically or seemingly telepathically consistently.
The question that I asked him was, how did you learn all of this? Do you have really good hearing? And he said, I'm special. And I said, oh, of course you're special. And he said, I can hear thoughts. And I said, bullshit. I questioned him and I said, are you sure you're telling the truth? And he said to me, you don't get the kind of gifts that I have if you lie. So then I asked him a question in my head without speaking, and he answered the question that I had asked him in my head.
Even skeptics who showed up expected to debunk the entire thing were genuinely perplexed and stunned at the results. But this isn't about one family. The podcast introduces another, and then another. Different ages, different states, different countries, different backgrounds. Yet, repeatedly, they describe the same experience of apparent mind-to-mind psychic communication. But it's not just parents. Teachers begin describing the same things. At first, many thought the parents must be imagining things until they witness it themselves. Impossible answers, things the kids couldn't possibly know, repeatedly. And then it goes deeper. Kids start describing something called the Hill, a place where psychic, autistic, non-speaking children can meet and communicate. A sort of psychic chat room where kids who live sometimes states apart can communicate. Kids who have never met but describe intimate details about each other accurately. They also describe vast libraries where they can learn almost anything, from languages to books. And in examples of a book, simply take the hat of an author, for example, like Mark Twain, put it on their head and suddenly absorb all of his works instantly. Others describe meeting ascended masters or great teachers or sometimes angels. In one interesting example, a teacher was trying to understand her telepathic students better. So she started reading a book on quantum physics, but she was having difficulty understanding it. She mentioned this to one of her students who asked to hold the book. And then he placed a hand on her knee, and instantly she understood the entirety of the book and all of its complex concepts all at once, much in the way the kids describe learning and reading on the hill.
Just the word telepathy, you can't reduce it to fact or fiction. Let's go look at the stories of these people, the science behind this. This is so much bigger than our knee-jerk reactions of truth.
I strongly recommend listening to the telepathy tapes. They also have a feature documentary coming out later this year. Now it's time to take a look at the dark side of ESP. Let me introduce you to Jordan Jozak. Jordan was in the GATE program like millions of other kids back in elementary school. GATE, known as the Gifted and Talented Education Program, was designed for gifted children. However, it was also used as a nationwide dragnet to locate and exploit psychically gifted children for military purposes. It sounds crazy, but I know of many people who were used and abused in this program. Jordan's story is just one of them.
I was enrolled at GATE, right? Like I was in the GATE classroom. I drank the pink drink. It's just that there was a progression of more. And that game began a 2-year journey to where I attended school into from the outside serving neurodivergent and behavioral health kids, but on the inside was supporting a mission for defense contractor research for psychic potential development. No longer exists now, but at the time it was called Baker Victory Services. So a lot of the testing, we can kind of think this started off very baseline of like ESP, right? So kind of like thinking about extrasensory perception. We also worked with something called RNGs, right? Or random number generators. And even though this is technological, a random number generator, there are examples where I personally and watched other kids push them sigmas of multitudes and held for hours just by using our thoughts. We were doing a lot different stuff than like you'll see from like the Stanford Research Institute or like the Stargate area, where you see a lot of like CRV techniques, right? Like controlled, repeatable, follow a technical process. In my training, they were more interested with getting me to subconsciously believe that awareness is essentially the substrate of this entire universe. And our awareness can shift into any other piece of awareness in this underlying universe. Let's say I remote viewed into a hallway, but I was having issues getting through a door. There was a lot of subconscious training to basically help me understand that my awareness could become the door. I could become the room. I could become the filing cabinet where the documents are in, and then extract the information that way. If your subconscious does not believe that whatever you're doing is possible, then your conscious mind will not allow it to be possible. Your subconscious has to believe it, right? It's like belief almost equals reality in this regard. And I believe that to be true just because of how much work went into getting, me trained on the subconscious level. If you can do this, you can remote view, you can shift your awareness, you can do all these things, you have to believe it for the idea of this later being utilized in like a defense establishment, style progression funnel.
I'm not even going to talk about how illegal this whole program is. What I want to add here is what Jordan was taught about consciousness and awareness. He was taught that consciousness is like the vehicle, like your body, or you can think of it like a car with 4 tires, etc. And awareness is like the driver in the driver's seat. So people would ask him, well, how do you get out of your body? How do you move into, through a door or become a filing cabinet or something. And he would say, well, that is consciousness, but awareness is what can move through those different things. Soon, Jordan's training would take another turn entirely, and he was introduced to something that can only be described as a wizard's orb.
It's a literal crystal orb, but the inside of this orb, for lack of a better word, was alive. So it had a structure that, if you could imagine almost like, if you were to imagine Jupiter in your mind, and Jupiter's like swirling atmosphere, imagine that inside the sphere, but highly white, highly crystallized, highly like almost you're looking into a VVS diamond. It's fractalized, it's swirling, and it's emitting its own light source. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where this crystal orb came from. I will note that the people within the program, the people that were actually shepherding this thing around, didn't call it tech. They called it a relic. And in one of the experiences, it was telling me that his name was Sylvia. They didn't know what this thing was. Hey, we need you to go talk to Sylvia, and we need you to come back with like a schematic. We want you to draw how it works. It was sentient and conscious and felt alive. As it would communicate telepathically, the first and foremost, like the most interesting thing is that it was feminine. And then from that point forward, everything that the program staff are trying to get out of it, like how does it work? Jordan, draw schematics of it. It didn't want to work with them. Nothing would really happen. And they would just get upset with me.
As amazing as Jordan's experience with Sylvia was, it had a purpose to teach him how to contact, commune, and communicate with non-human intelligence so it could be killed.
There was another aspect that they were highly interested in developing, and this was something called the Prometheus system. So just like I've described my interactions with Sylvia, right, like highly telepathic, right, just linking through consciousness, that seems to be exactly how most of these UAP, UFO, other materials are interacted with, right? So they're not flown with joysticks. They're flown through the mind. You mesh with it consciously. How do you do that? You take your consciousness outside of your body and you become that object, right? And there's an art and a skill of doing this. So the same way that right now my consciousness feels like it's in my body, I would lay in a deep meditation. I would have some type of, perhaps sedative or some type of, other substance often used, different auditory aids, and shift my consciousness into said object or some vehicle and become it. And from that point of view, actually demonstrate command and control, right? Pilot it up and down, move it left and right. And this is where the Prometheus system would come in, right? So a highly gifted psychic kid can mesh their consciousness and get said object or UAP to move. Well, how do we give that power to an Air Force guy, right? Who's not have an open consciousness, does not have an open heart. From what I understand, what they were trying to do is build a brain neural interface, right? So, and then creating a mechanistic machine, an interface that would reproduce the brainwave signals that I was sending out. So then you could boil it back down to someone with a controller. You're going to take psionics, highly developed psychic aptitude. They're going to go set up in the desert. They're going to run their protocols and processes, which are probably highly formulated on love, right? And they're probably going to do that in an environment where there's directed energy weapons all around. So you're almost creating this like honeypot of like, hey, we love you. Come see us. We want to interact with you. And then let's say that thing interacts. All of a sudden, they're hit with a directed energy weapon, materialized, and like dead. Then it's recovered. I'm high confidence in the fact that crash retrieval operations have shot many things with directed energy weapons. I experienced this. I was interacting with the phenomena. My consciousness was co-creating, co-piloting, and whatever kind of, manifestation of the phenomena that was showing up, right? And halfway through the process, as I was like communicating with other people, kind of demonstrating this, I felt something go wrong that I've never felt before. The way that I could kind of explain it is it felt as if my body was actually turning to stone. Didn't feel like I was getting electrocuted. It felt as if the thing that I was connected to consciously, as well as my body, was immediately turning into stone. And there was like an emergency I felt to get my consciousness out of this thing and back to my body, because it felt like if I stayed, that the conduit, right, this like unseen consciousness connection was going to be like severed. And there was almost a, ability for me to get stuck in this thing, right, if I didn't return back to my body. And from what I understand, the area that I was running that exercise in happened to have directed energy weapons. As I'm telling this, I've gotten to a point of healing and integration. And now, as you know, right, like trying to fight the good fight to do better about this. But like, don't mistake the, level of like healing that I've done to, really reflect like the terror that actually this whole entire experience was like in childhood.
As you can now see, telepathy, ESP, psionics, whatever you want to call it, is not only real, but it leads to some extraordinary places. Unfortunately, in our current cycle of UFO and UAP disclosure, we're not even talking about telepathy. And in the case of Jordan and lots of other gate kids, there are massive human rights violations which need to be investigated, and many people need to go to prison. Additionally, it looks like some rogue portion of our government is shooting down UFOs, seemingly without the knowledge of Congress or the president, which is an act of war against a foreign power. Now, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to wake you up and point to a future brighter than you can currently imagine. Telepathy is real. You can learn it. They're afraid of you, and they should be. If you want to learn remote viewing, there are links below to a website where you can practice on pre-selected remote viewing targets. It's kind of fun. You don't need any training to begin. Also, I have a recent video where I teach you how to use your body to get yes or no answers to any question that you can think of from now into the distant past. It's kind of mind-blowing. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Disclosure Dad. Let's disclose some truth together.